Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2012 Law and the Media Workshop. It's Get the Story, Avoid the Legal Traps, which I'm sure you're all hoping to do. I'm Dana Bales. I'll be your moderator this evening. I'm with the Law Society of BC, and we put these workshops on annually with the Jack Webster Foundation. I'm sure you're all familiar with what the Webster Foundation does. I know some of you have even won Webster Awards, but I don't know how many of you are familiar with what the Law Society does. Can I just get a show of hands? How many people know the difference between the Canadian Bar Association of BC and the Law Society of BC?
Better put your hand up.
I'll put mine up. The essential difference is that we regulate lawyers in the province, and the Canadian Bar Association of BC is the advocate for lawyers in the province. So basically, our whole raison d'etre is protection of the public. And one of the ways in which we see our mandate is public education on legal issues, because for the public, knowledge is power. And that's where you guys come in, because you are the ones who provide the public with most of their knowledge about legal stories through your legal reporting and that kind of thing. And so that's why we teamed up with the Jack Webster Foundation, whose whole purpose is excellence in journalism, to try and assist you at workshops like this with enhancing the skills that you already have for legal reporting. I just want to do a quick poll and find out how many of you file more than one story a day. Can you just raise your hand if you file more than one story a day? Okay, now how many of you want to do investigative original pieces? Just raise your hand. Really high so everyone can see. And now keep your hand up if you have the time to do original investigative pieces. Okay. So that is kind of a reflection of what's happening in journalism today. Nobody kept their hand up in terms of having the time to do that type of thing. Yet it's still sort of expected of you. That is really what the public wants in terms of the value that you can provide as the Fifth Estate. So what we're hoping to do here tonight is to give you some assistance with quick, on-your-feet thinking, so that if you get an opportunity like this brown envelope, you can move pretty quickly while still making all your other deadlines, but hopefully not fall into any legal traps. Because let's face it, when you're moving that fast and there are that many things expected of you, and you're filing multiple stories, and perhaps you have to blog about that or tweet about that as well, the opportunity to make mistakes is pretty high. So if you can have that little bit of comfort that you have a sense of what's going on legally, and I mean, you can always call Dan or David, but they'll charge you by the hour, and tonight it's free. So we hope you'll ask lots of questions and get in there and take advantage of our panel. And now to our esteemed panel. Dan Burnett, media lawyer. If it's an important media issue in Canada, Dan probably touched it. He's been to the Supreme Court of Canada numerous times. He's had a tremendous influence on your work, even if you don't know it, because of his winning Supreme Court of Canada libel case on the defense of fair comment. So he helped you all out there. And we're very lucky to have him here tonight. And we also have Sandy Heimlich-Hall, Kamloops' very own. She's Assistant News Director of CFJC TV7. And she is an active member of that other awards body, the RTNDA. And Sandy herself has won so many journalism awards that if she actually displayed them all on her desk, she couldn't get any work done. So
it's the team.
And David Sutherland, who is also a media lawyer, and we've had the good fortune of having him on virtually all of our law and media workshops, and his clients have had the good fortune of working with him, and many of his clients have gone on to win Webster Awards based on stories that David has helped them with legal advice on. So maybe the moral of the story is you don't have to talk to Scott, just do something legal. Get something connected to a legal award. In any event, we're going to get started. So you've got your brown envelopes. You've had a chance to look at those. And now Dan is going to take you from there.
Okay, so I mean, usually on these on seminars we have speakers, and we talk about particular topics and latest developments and things you need to know. This one's going to be quite different. This one is going to be following through a story, a big story, in the way that that it really happens, which is not, you know, you've got a nice static situation and you can intellectualize about it. It's kind of moving as you go. And so the beginning of this thing is every journalist's dream, and it's receiving the brown envelope. I don't know if anybody's actually ever received a brown envelope or something like it, but you know, you have been leaked by somebody some documents that that may or may not look like they have any legs to them as far as a possible story goes, and so what I wanted to do, if you've got those in front of you, is just kind of, well, there's 3 documents. The first is an expense reimbursement claim for about $1,800 from the mayor of Prince George, Richard Hawthorne, for Las Vegas meetings with city planner re-expanded gaming, November 6th and 7th, 2011, and he signed it. So that's document 1. Document 2 is a travel invoice with a matching amount, $1,800 roughly, from Marlin Travel for the flight to and from Vegas and the accommodation and the dates that line up with the form. And those are stapled together. And then lastly, you've got a partly blacked out MasterCard statement for Richard Hawthorne with 3 entries on looks like the same dates. For the one for the Sapphire Gentlemen's Club, Las Vegas. YouTube that on your smartphone if you want right now. World Series of Poker and Rio Las Vegas room charges of, looks like you raided the minibar or something. Anyways, so the first thing that I want to do is just pause at this point and ask about, you know, you receive something anonymously. You receive something that, you know, that raises some questions in your mind, and I wanted to kind of kicking off with Sandy, who is in the role of newspaper editor, by the way, tonight, and David, who's in the role of her lawyer tonight, and to sort of say, well, you know, what are the initial issues that they spot that arise from this thing? I mean, or initial questions that come up, and then you might have some thoughts, and we're going to kind of do that as the plot unfolds here.
So let's start with Sandy then. So Sandy, you've got this envelope. What would you do?
Well, first of all, when I open this, I mean, I get excited because I'm hoping that this is really genuine. But I guess that's the real question. Is it? That's one of the first questions. Is this genuine? Is this the mayor's signature? You've got a lot of verifying to do, I would say. Was he really in Vegas? Was there really this meeting? When I look at it, I kind of say, hey, he got a pretty good deal on the flights, you know, and it looks like everything adds up there, but he's got these expenses on his MasterCard for a lot of entertainment. So he was only there for 2 days. Looks like he had a lot of entertainment. So there might be some questions to ask about, even though it's on his MasterCard and he hasn't charged it to the city, it looks like. How much work was he doing there? How much time did he do? How much work did he do on behalf of the city? But I guess one of the bigger questions is, and we don't know this, who dropped it off and why? What do they have to gain by dropping this off? I think you have to consider that. But we have something that looks pretty interesting right off, you know, at first blush. So I think we've got to start checking it out and making some phone calls quietly.
So who are you going to call, Sandy?
Who am I going to call? Well, I guess I could start with the hotel in Las Vegas, you know, about what kind of event was going on down there. I might start doing what you said, Googling what these places are, like the Sapphire Gentlemen's Club, who I'm not familiar with, Dan, but apparently you are.
Only for the purposes of tonight.
The World Series of Poker kind of raises an issue for me. What was he doing there? I would start with the hotel. I mean, you've got to be careful, because if you start asking questions to the wrong person, you could really, you know, they could start covering their tracks pretty soon. So I might start with the sources far away. Maybe if you had sources in City Hall, you might start tapping them and asking what they knew about this event, just asking, you know, quiet questions about it and what the city got out of it, and you wouldn't let people know what you had. But I would start there, and of course, we would touch base with our lawyer.
That you've used all your life, yeah.
Yes.
And what would he say?
We've just met.
And what would the lawyer say? Just sort
Oh,
of
the only thing that troubles me a little bit, I don't know enough about the World Series of Poker, but what I would think is that might be a round number, looks awfully like an entry fee. And I'd be curious, I mean, what I would mention to the journalist is the possibility that what the rat is trying to smear this honorable public servant with is the rat is trying to smear the honorable public servant with the idea that in fact he got his transportation from the city, but he was basically down there with to
be in a high stakes poker game.
Yeah, well, to play in the World Series, which is something that can lead to $1 million or something at the top. Okay. And it's an elimination process. So that would be what I would raise. Now, but that's not me being a source. It's just sort of you're there conspiring with the journalist about the situation. The other main thing that I would warn at is the first thing that Sandy said is the smartest thing that, I mean, I think a lot of journalists need to hear. The first thing she said is, we got to verify this. Do we know this is the mayor's signature? Do we know that this is false? Every time I think that you get an anonymous source or somebody who wants to be confidential or someone who passes you an envelope, there's often really a problem with their identity and a problem with your story. And quite often when they want to be confidential, they're using your honor, your promise to protect them so they can take unfair pot shots at somebody because they've got a very significant axe to grind. So I'm always very worried about the anonymous source, the ones who want to remain anonymous based on your promise. I'm very worried about them. I think that those are the cases, unlike what Dana was saying, those are the cases where you have to work harder than any others as to get to the truth, because you've got to be very worried about the integrity of your initial source. Whereas that is not normally the problem. Normally, you go to somebody who's already in the news or already an important thing and try and get their story and get them to go on record and to say something meaningful. And you're playing them, but I quite often think the anonymous sources are playing you, and you have to be very, very careful that, especially if you're going to acquit your promise to your readers, which is to be to have as valuable information as you possibly can.
So let's jump out there and see what all of you think about this. Anyone have any thoughts what you're going to do? Got Mel over here. Just Mel, if you just hold on for the mic.
Would it be too easy to just phone the mayor and ask him, make note of the fact that we weren't paying attention to your travel schedule like we should have been in the media. We weren't doing our job properly, but we have heard that you were in Las Vegas on a certain conference or whatever. Is that true or not? And what was it about, and what did you get out of it, and what did the taxpayers get out of it? And start there instead of doing the round, the circular route.
Well, Mel, since we have the benefit of you being a former mayor, would you answer those kind of questions?
Well, I think I try to avoid answering those questions if I've been in Las Vegas playing in the World Series of Poker or visiting the Sapphire Gentlemen's Club, but you'd certainly put me on the spot, and I'd have to come up with something. But look, it's easy. It's an easy thing to verify where a mayor was on a weekend. So just ask him what he was doing there. You don't have to give the rest of the information that you have or supposedly have from the source. But why not start with the direct route?
Anyone else dying to get in there on what you do? Okay, so let's throw it back to Dan.
Well, I just want to add. I'm going to put up one little bit because the next step in what somebody did here wasn't quite calling the mayor. Well, so we have
credit card slip.
Here's the next little piece of the puzzle that
You see it, Sam?
It's a memo from Barb Digger, the reporter to Sandy Hall news director. Sandy, I got leaked documents showing the mayor's fudged his expense accounts. He claimed a holiday to Vegas was for city business. I called his ex-wife, Colleen. She wouldn't talk unless I guaranteed I would never identify her. I said, okay. She told me the mayor was in Vegas in November of 2011 with his brother, Bob, because he asked her to swap weekend custody of the kids. He told her it was for a 2-day poker tournament. I haven't confronted the mayor about it yet, so that raises Mel's very question. You start right off the bat and go to the mayor? I'm also worried that his ex has an axe to grind, so I don't know if I can believe her. I need some guidance here. So, I mean, one of the questions I've got is, does anybody perceive, is there a reason not to call the mayor right now? Is there a reason to sort of sit on this and gather more, or is there a reason to just go with a story?
I would not go with the story. I don't think you've verified enough yet. And yeah, I think there's a real question about having the ex-wife having an axe to grind, and if she's being upfront with you. This is a tough one, because I guess it depends too on you know, what your relationship is with people at City Hall, what your relationship is with the mayor. I mean, I agree with Mel. I think in our city we'd probably just phone and go, were you really in Las Vegas? And can I ask what you were doing there? We could probably do that, but not everyone has a really good relationship, perhaps. I would definitely start with him, but then I wouldn't just leave it there. You'd have to call other people, and maybe this woman is telling the truth, but you need to do more checking then. I mean, that's when you might have to start phoning friends, colleagues of his at City Hall. And like I say, tapping your sources at City Hall, and it's really important to have those.
What about an FOI request? Anyone thinking about that?
Absolutely. Do an FOI. I mean, does the FOI match what we're seeing here?
Right. There's a couple of hands up.
Just on the World Series thing, it's if you go online, you can see everyone who's placed, and you can see if he's entered under his name, like my brother did, and didn't want someone to know. It would be public. It'd be like checking a wedding document in Vegas. You can check anyone who's been married there too online. So I guess this is an example of online is your friend on here, right? So.
Mm-hmm. And Dan, what legal issues do you see here with that memo, if you went with the story now?
Well, there's a couple of things I'll throw on the table that haven't come up yet. I mean, one has to do with right back in the beginning when you. I always tell people when they open a, you know, they get a document. You know, I guess these days it's usually a brown email, not a brown or something. But you know, when you open something and somebody's just handed you somebody's visa receipt or somebody's medical records or somebody's. I mean, your sort of privacy bells kind of pop off, right? I mean, you're thinking now somebody has, you know, is probably committed, you know, a breach of privacy by providing this to you, and what's going on with that? And am I going to be, you know, getting myself into trouble furthering that? So that's one question that arises. Another question that just I just want to throw on the table is, you've now got Barb Digger, before asking for her guidance. Maybe correctly, maybe not, having promised anonymity to this mayor's wife. And David made some points about that a minute ago. But when you're into promises like that, obviously you need to be pretty careful, because the law is not necessarily going to protect you. So how sort of thorough have you made that promise? How much of a corner have you painted yourself into? But on the other hand, the law is, based on a case that I just got a decision on, is quite clear that if you have any hope of protecting a confidential source down the road, there better have been an explicit promise, or your chances of protecting the source are dead in the water. So, on one hand, you need to make an agreement. On the other hand, you know, when you do, it's a serious thing.
David.
I was just going to say that I think when you've got any kind of anonymity that you're granting, and there are a lot of levels of confidentiality. There's that we won't use your name in the newspaper, or we won't put your name in the broadcast. is one level of anonymity. There's another level that, you know, I as a journalist will never reveal your identity no matter what, ever, even though I'll rot in jail for refusing for the rest of my life for doing that. There are a lot of gradations in between that we sometimes commend to you, the gradation that is, well, I will keep your identity secret if you tell me this story until the end of the second month in jail or the end of the first month in jail, because we know that Dan Burnett will get up to the Court of Appeal and get me out in the meantime. So that kind of promise can happen with a journalist. You've got to think very hard about what your promise is. Then the next thing is, I think you've also been given steno pads in front of you. And I don't know how many of you still use the journalistic steno pad method. Put your promise, whatever your promise is, in writing. The next thing is, from then on, if you're giving confidentiality, you're giving identity, you've got to make your notes can't blow the case, can't blow the identity. So your notes, you have to separate the telephone number of the source from the part of your notepad that's got what they tell you. So you've got to put the promise near what the testimony or evidence, we call it evidence, but you know, the story, you got to put the promise, what you promised, in, and you've got to code name the identity of the source if you're giving a promise. Most news organizations have a rule, which I don't know if everybody recommends, but I certainly think the Patricia Graham rule from the Vancouver Sun is that nobody gets to make a promise of confidentiality of any kind without the editor participating in that process. Most newsrooms have more than one person because of the business of needing, if you've got any opinion in it at all, you've got to prove all the facts, and as a result, we've got to be able to, have this access to the witness, and one journalist can get hit by a bus, and as a result, which we certainly hope doesn't happen, but you've got to build in some ability. So those are the things about confidentiality I say. Second, I just say any time you're getting into it, it's not something you just do right away. You've got to, there's a bunch of, in order to have any promise of confidentiality, have any chance of holding water, you've got an awful lot of steps you've got to take along the way. So this isn't something where the first time, you've got to be confident that you can't get the story without it. And on this case, the way it's unfolded, you can probably get the story by going online, as our friend down here suggests, by just simply going online and finding out where the guy stood relative to his brother.
And she's just giving you another way to go with the story is to go to the brother.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask something though? I mean, she sent an email identifying who her source is to me. Is that a problem?
Yes. And I'll tell you why the problem is. It's that, first of all, what always used to be a search warrant, that you were always, where you had to, the reason you're keeping your notes separate is you could get a search warrant. And somebody could be such to march in, like the Gestapo, and turn your newsroom upside down until they've got all your notes. Search warrants are very, very seldom used. Has anybody here been in a newsroom that's had a search warrant? It's us older guys, with great respect. What I'm going to say is, because they did happen, but there's now this newfangled thing called a production order, which I don't know who's been subject to that. I know there are people here in Kamloops who have, which is one of those new things where a judge can just order that documents be produced. And you're immediately in a situation without really all the search warrant precautions. The notice to produce, or what's it called? Notice to produce this. I've got a criminal code here somewhere you can find it. But anyway, you've got to make sure you don't have records. Like Judy Steed of the Toronto Star had records that foisted her later on, because when she was saying that John Munro, the cabinet minister, had profited from dredging in the Hamilton Harbor, she said, hey, we're going to get him this time. She proved her malice right in the middle of it, remember?
Well, and I think, David, I mean, you
don't want your name like Judy Steed to be everywhere.
I mean, one of the issues with the email point is a really good one Sandy raised, because I can tell you, anytime you're in a lawsuit situation these days, the thing that the diabolical lawyer who's trying to rake you over the coals wants is all of your email, because email is the lawyer's absolute treasure trove of unguarded comments. And even if they're, so A, keep them professional, because it's amazing how you think you've deleted, it's still there. And B, you've got an email that names the source, so now the process becomes a very awkward one where you've got to, it's called redacting, where you delete that piece of the document, which basically shines a gigantic spotlight on that issue, and suddenly that becomes the focal point of the whole lawsuit. Who's your source? These things become big issues. So what I want to do is I just want to move to the next slide. By the way, in terms of following this along, right now, for better or for worse, Barb and Sandy have made the decision they're going to hang back a little bit before they call the mayor. They're a bit worried he's going to try to cover his tracks. I think maybe they've got something. And the online research doesn't pan out. You see a name, but you can't tell, was he there for 5 minutes or 2 days or what?
He wasn't very good.
He's an also-ran. He certainly didn't win $1 million or anything. Okay, so here's where we're at. I mean, this is the bottom thing is somebody holding a Webster Award. That could be you, or a World's Greatest Loser mug. So that's what we're talking about here. Is where are the stakes on this thing? And if you're talking about a mayor who is basically, at least potentially here, I suppose at the worst case scenario, defrauding the city as to why he's in Las Vegas and collecting taxpayer money to go there, that's a very serious defamation. That's a big money damage case. And I mean, we haven't really used the word defamation yet, but that's really the subtext to all this. I mean, there's other issues, privacy and so forth, but I mean, David sort of put his finger on the pulse there, right? I mean, it was on the button, which is, the implication is that the guy got the taxpayers to pay for him to go down to Vegas and then use that for his own personal.
And maybe we could just get either you, Dan, or David, whichever one of you feels like taking it, just to explain a little bit more what exactly defamation is and how somebody can bring a suit based on defamation.
Okay. If you say anything in print that damages the reputation of a person, that is a natural person or a corporation or a charity or a union, and you do it in print or broadcast, there are 3 presumptions that go against you. It's first presumed that what you've said is false. It's second presumed that you said it for a malicious, ulterior, improper purpose. And the third thing is that you've caused actual damage to the individual that's measurable in thousands of dollars. So we have it's a reverse onus tort. We have a system where if you say something that damages the reputation of a person or corporation or union or charity, and you are behind the 8 ball, and there are only 6 defenses, and only 4 of them apply to journalists. The defenses are, the first one is privilege of some kind or other, that you're entitled to report this because it happened at the council meeting, at the public meeting, at the courts, in one of the beats. It happened at one of the beats that we cover. We cover council, we cover public meetings, we cover courts, we cover the ombudsperson, we cover official things. That's privilege. It was actually said, you got it, it's a fair and accurate report of what was actually said. We're not responsible for its truth. If the husband said the butler did it with the candlestick, you're allowed to report. The husband says the butler did it with the candlestick, because that was what was said in court. You're entitled to report without being responsible for it being true. So privilege is the first one. Fair comment is the second one. Protects only opinion. You have to be able to tell the difference between fact and opinion. This is the defense that Dan Burnett is going to explain to you in a few minutes, because he's the guy who changed the law in Canada on fair comment in the case that Dana was referring to. The third, so you're going to explain fair comment in a minute. The third defense is truth, and the last defense doesn't work very well. It's called consent, that the other person, the person you were talking about, consents to you saying that, or I drew the inference, or a reasonable inference that he consented. It doesn't work very well. The two defenses that aren't mentioned are mitigation, which is that he didn't have much of a good reputation to begin with, which doesn't work very well, only works with Clifford Olson. And the other one is innocent dissemination, that it was in the envelope and I'm the postman. I didn't know what was in the thing, whereas the postman is responsible for what happens on the back of the postcard. That's English law, believe it or not. So innocent dissemination, you have to have a pretty good, the newspaper delivery person can't have read the entire New York Times, so he's not responsible for what's on page 97. That's the defense of innocent dissemination.
Well, let me sort of zero in this way with you, David, and you can comment. In this case, just you've got, and that's a very good overview, and in this case what you've got is there's no council meeting or court case you're reporting on.
Right. No occasion.
The message that you're toying with, maybe there being a story about, is mayor goes to Vegas claiming it was for city business and it wasn't, or it wasn't all for city business. When I'm hearing you describe that, I think to myself, well, if it's not true, you're flapping in the wind. I can't see another defense of that list that could get it, right? So,
but you've got to note that the whole of all of our freedom of speech and everything that you do is protected by one of those four defenses, or you're walking on the wild side. And so what we do for a living, Dan and I do, is look at what you guys want to broadcast or print and think about with that set of categories. Is this an occasion of privilege? Is it fair comment? Is the sting really opinion based on fact and we can prove the fact? Is it true? Can we prove it? Truth is the last refuge of the ink-stained wretch, is the expression that they use, I think, when they're talking down from the Whigs and the Woolsack at you. They say, you dare to say this about the mayor, his worship, the mayor.
So if truth's where it's at, I'm interested, before we move, I'm going to move the next slide pretty quick here, but what I'd like to kind of get out is if anybody has any thoughts about, okay, well, what else can you do here?
Yeah.
I mean, what else can you do? I mean, if basically verifying the facts is, and maybe in this case clarifying some facts, is the key to the whole thing, are all the options on the table already? Have we kind of discussed them, or is there more?
Well, we haven't mentioned that we didn't talk to the Las Vegas guys. Did he, in fact, actually even meet with anybody? Because if you can establish that he didn't meet with anybody, then you've already got something on the mayor that you could probably run with. You might not be able to run with the Sapphire Gentlemen's Club or the other things, but if you establish he was in Vegas on the taxpayer's dime, but not for an actual council or meeting with Vegas planners, you've probably at least got something there.
And we've got another gentleman over here who wants to get in on that.
So get a hold of Vegas and?
A big red flag for me would be that
Sir, if I could just get you to hold the mic up.
on the second page, instead of YVR, it says YRV. So maybe...
so that's either a forgery or the organizer of this seminar has bumblefingers. Okay.
Yes.
One of those two.
Let's go with bumblefingers and assume it's true.
Good point. Yeah, Derek. Oh, sorry, there's one more.
Well, the other thing is his travel stuff should be quite easily available from City Hall. It really, I mean, you just phone up the finance department and ask for the documents. I mean, I've seen Mel's muffin receipts. It's not that hard.
You didn't know anybody was investigating your muffler.
That's right.
I think there's one over here on this side. Derek.
First, I just want to say this looks vaguely familiar, Dan. We were involved a couple of years ago with something similar to this, and one of the first things I would do, honestly, is I would get the mayor. I work for a television station, so I would get the mayor on tape talking about it, because we ran the mayor denying that all about a dozen times with sweat pouring down his forehead, and when he finally confessed it all, I mean, it was beautiful to have him, with the denial. And correct me if I'm wrong, but we can ask as many questions as we want, right? And it's not until we broadcast it that we might run in and foul of the law. Correct?
Well, that's true, although I suppose in this case, somebody might, he might say, well, I'm going to the police because somebody's obviously purloined my Visa card and everything. I mean, who knows? I'm just throwing out options there.
But as far as defamation
goes, yeah.
Well, when you go and ask a question, sometimes embedded in the question is the imputation that the mayor is a cheating, lying bastard. And in which case, it might be that you could cross the line into slander. It's a far less serious problem, but it's possible.
But so don't have the conversation with your pointed questions in front of a crowd of people.
No.
Right. One-on-one, you can't be run afoul.
Another point that you touched on, Dan, is that he may well have gone down there and had a meeting with the city planners, and like that meeting might have been half an hour. He's down there for 2 or 3 days. So I'd be really careful about, if saying that he went down there and he claims it was for city business, but it wasn't, because technically it might have been, and we could go on to say, well, this is what else he did while he was down there on the taxpayers' dime.
Sandy, do you want to get in on that?
Yeah, I think too it's important to verify how much time he spent in those meetings. I mean, you're right, he could have been there for half an hour and left. Was that worth the city tax, or was that worth it to taxpayers? I'm curious, when you phoned the mayor of, when you phoned that mayor, Prince George, was he willing to talk right away? Or did you just show up and start asking questions?
With us, it turned out that we were interviewing him on July 1st anyways about some of the festivities for Canada Day. And that's why he said he was sweating so profusely. It was the fact that it was July 1st and it was hot out. So yeah, we basically ambushed him, but we had a lot of evidence first.
Okay. So let's separate the real from the fictitious for a minute, and we'll go to the next slide.
Let's see what happens next here. Another memo from Barb Digger to Sandy. I put an FOI request, but also show the expense claim to a city staffer who checked it and said it was authentic. I also called the mayor's brother. He left a voice message back saying, "This is Bob Hawthorne. Yes, Rick and I had a holiday in Vegas. Is that some crime? I know what you're trying to do. He didn't do anything dishonest, and you can expect a world of trouble if you start saying otherwise." I saved the voice message, and I'm thinking of eventually putting it on the web version of the story. Thoughts? Sandy?
Well, first of all, yeah, it's good to save all of that. I would not put it on the web just yet. I think we're still a long way from reporting on this story. It's good that I think the FOI request had to have been made. The mayor is clearly now aware that we're possibly onto him if he really did something. Let's assume he did in this case. And we now have verification that he was on a holiday with his brother. He calls it a holiday, right? Yeah. So that shouldn't be paid for by taxpayers. So that raises a flag for me. As for the threat, I guess you're going to have to. We are treading carefully already, right? I mean, I wouldn't be backing off because of that. But
what would you do next, Sandy?
Well, I think the thing I would do next is I think you need to you go back, and I would talk to the mayor again and say, look, this was a holiday. This is according to your brother. The taxpayer has a right to know. We're not trying to do anything here. We're just trying to clear some stuff up. Just tell us what's going on. Was this a holiday? Was it something for business? I think you've got to give him that chance and do what you said. Do it on the record. Do it on tape or get him recorded. Get his quotes, but keep those because they're going to come in handy down the line if you can, when this breaks.
Let's throw it back out to the audience. And anybody else think of anything else that they would do at this stage now that they've got this? Scott?
So just a question.
Sorry.
Just a question about the authenticity of the expense claim. Like, I wonder what that means. Does it mean that this is verified the signature, and this was the very person who submitted it, or this just looks like a city expense claim, and I make no.
Good point.
Yeah. Let's assume, I think for the purposes of our exercises, that it's a real expense form that he did claim that amount.
but it's a very good point, because, I mean, it's, okay, did he claim that amount? Was he paid that amount? Right? I mean, like these are pieces of the puzzle that are going to come up. But so yeah, I think Ian's right. We've got those, but it's a bit vague. I mean, I imagine Sandy as editor would kind of want to pin that down.
Yeah.
Well, what did you really ask? I'm just going to throw in one more slide.
I just want to
okay.
raise one other question, just to ask the journalists here, because there is a little bit of a vague threat here, that, you know, we're going to give you a world of pain, or whatever the expression was, a world of trouble. I would imagine, I'm guessing that every journalist here has received a threat at some stage that they will be regretting the day they were born if they follow the course they are apparently following. Is that true? Can everybody put their hand up who's received a threat? Okay, and how many of the cases, if you could put your mind back over the cases where you've received a threat like this, I'm curious to know from the journalist's point of view, how many times it actually preceded discovering that the case was really very much more interesting than you thought it was. I mean, in other words, was that, has it become kind of an indication to you that the story's better than you thought it was when you get that kind of threat? Or do you actually think that often the threats only come from people who are completely innocent when you're on the wrong trail? I'm sort of curious about your experience with that.
Anyone who had a threat want to weigh in there?
Does anybody understand my question? Does anybody understand the question?
Okay.
Is a threat an indication the story's good, or is it an indication that maybe you should think twice about the fact that you're on the wrong track? Which is it? Or
I'd say neither.
is there any general rule?
I would say neither. I mean, really, neither and neither. You know, it might just be that his brother really loves his brother, the mayor, and is suspicious of the media and is angry and sure that you're going to go off and do something illegal. It could be something really illegal is going on. I don't think that's any indication of where you are in the story.
And just regarding Scott's point, I think it's a really, you know, for the purposes of this exercise, let's assume that it is authentic. But it is a really good point that when you are the person calling to authenticate it, you do want to be asking those kinds of questions, not just, is this a real city document? Is this city document accurate? It's important to get on that. Let's just touch on that voicemail there. So Dan, if you did put something like that on your website, could you publish it, given that he left it as a voicemail? Truth and defamation aside.
Well, I mean, I get this all the time, and always from people in broadcast news, TV, or radio. You know, and it's either we got a voicemail message where somebody's yelling at us, and it's juicy as hell, and we'd love to include it in our story. Or I was talking to somebody and I just forgot to tell them I was recording, and can I go with it anyways? You know, those kinds of things arise, and it's a fascinating area because on one hand, you know, when somebody calls and they're talking to a reporter and they're not off the record, voicemail or straight on or otherwise, I mean, you could report word for word what they said if you decided it was newsworthy to do so. And yet there's sort of a heebie-jeebie that comes up when people hear their voice and they realize they've been recorded and so forth. And I think judges share that concern. And so you get into a breach of privacy sort of issue. There's some radio regulations about, you know, that the radio people will know about when somebody, when you use an audio from somebody who phones into a radio station and it hasn't been on an explicit put me on the air line, that actually is a breach of regulations right there. And more broadly, with respect to the privacy stuff, what I always look to is you know, on the assumption that a judge might agree that somebody's voicemail to you, not intended for publication, could be considered a breach of privacy. Is there a public interest aspect, which is an acid test both for whether it's a story, a decent part of the story, but also whether there would be a legal defense to an arguable breach of privacy. So in this case, you look at the situation, you go, geez, I mean, we were threatened. I mean, maybe the guy was well-intentioned, maybe he really does think his brother was wrong, he was just kind of being hot-headed. But on the other hand, you know, is that a story? Or does that make you part of the story? Maybe it does, you know. Now suddenly, you know, we're, you know, mayor's brother threatens radio station or newspaper.
Thank you. So, suppose the mayor inadvertently hit the wrong number on speed dial, phones the newsroom by mistake, although most mayors don't seem to have us on speed dial, leaves a message saying, Bob, please cover my ass, blah, 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 blah. You're telling me you can't use that?
Well, I'm telling you, that example would hit the public interest defense in spades, I would think, right? I mean, the mayor's actually trying to do a cover-up.
Yeah, at this stage we're talking about the brother. This is the brother who's left the voicemail. But Dan, the fact that the brother knows you're a journalist and knows that they're leaving it on your voicemail, does that change anything?
Oh, I mean, my argument in those cases would be there's no breach of privacy here at all. I mean, he was calling a journalist, he was leaving a message, but I can tell you the way judges react and the way people react to all of a sudden hearing their voice when they didn't realize they were being recorded or didn't consent to it is a whole other level, and you shouldn't underestimate that. From your standpoint, I guess the takeaway on that thing is realize that people react to that, and you don't make that decision lightly.
We have another question at the back here.
Yes. Now, this is sort of bringing it into television as opposed to just an audio thing. Now, our station doesn't do this, but I've seen it. The reporter might mic themselves up and then walk up to a front door of a house, bang on it, and then get somebody kind of peering out, talking to them. But they never ask for permission to use any of it, but then they end up going and using it in their story. Now, does that cross the line?
Well, I think that falls into, that's another permutation on what I was saying, and I guess the broad category would be surreptitious news gathering, and to put it in the most bottom line terms, your defense to using that kind of a technique, and then you see it on the air, and people do it, and people do consumer things with car dealers and all that, is that it's in the public interest. You're catching something that is somebody either doing something illegal or doing something that the public should know about, and if you're into that category, then fine. I mean, if you've got the corner store, and if you say the right thing, they'll slip you some drugs for $10, and they'll never do that if you walk in with a camera rolling, right? So that's the example.
We had another one at the back there, I believe. Is there someone else with their hand up back there?
Just a question. So if in this case or any other case, if you as a reporter call a source and you're talking to them on the phone and they understand that you're interviewing them, or they call you out of the blue, like the brother did, you're saying that you can use what he said, whether it's in a voicemail or to you in print, but you might not be able to on the web or on the radio. Is there a legal difference?
Yes and no. I mean, the legal difference is that when they're giving you information, it's not off the record. There's no judge who's going to, unless it's an unguarded moment and they say something very personal. But generally speaking, if they give you information off the record, to report that information is not reaching a legal line. I think it's illogical, but I can tell you it's a reality. If you start putting a recording of somebody up there they didn't know was being recorded, there are arguments that arise about breach of privacy, and you better have a public interest defense, or else. And really, I mean, for news purposes, unless it is something that rises to the level of being a public interest part of the story, why are you using it anyways? I guess is part of the question.
Yeah, unless you're going to record just for note-taking purposes. But if you were planning on broadcasting, would you have to tell them that you were recording it for broadcast? Unless it was a situation like this where the fellow is clearly leaving it on a reporter's voicemail. But if you called someone to interview them, and say you're a radio journalist and you didn't tell them I'm recording and they thought they were just giving you background information, could you use it?
Well, I mean, that brings in, and the questions generally bring in a second piece of this puzzle, which is broadcast standards, or if you're print, press council stuff. But then you're into a high standard and all of that. And there's clear rulings from both of those bodies that unless you have a situation where that's the only way you could get the story, and it's in the public interest, they'll dump on you for using audio that you have collected without disclosing.
But Dan, that was going to be my question, that he left a voicemail, so he knew he was being recorded.
Yeah, well, that's a good, and that would be part of the argument. I'm just saying, I see how these things go, and you need, and you could just take the bull by the horns and say, we're going with it, and we're going to defend it. But I think in the end of the day, public interest is going to, I mean, he's supplying a critical piece of this puzzle here. We were on a holiday in Vegas, apart from the threat part, right?
Another question I just want to ask is, does it make a difference that he's not in public office? Like the mayor is a public figure. This is his brother. So would that make a difference in a judge's mind?
I think it can. Or to take it one step further, you call up the mayor's elderly mother in her care home and get her chit-chatting about, you're probably, you know what I mean? Like you're that much further from somebody who knows it, who's close to office. But since we're talking about voice messages, I want to put in this one. You just received a phone call back from your Vegas research that somebody suggested earlier on, very important piece. Voice message: hello, this is Fran Parks calling back. I'm the head city planner for the city of Las Vegas. You were asking about meetings in November 2011 with the mayor, Richard Hawthorne. I've checked and we certainly didn't have any meetings with that person in November or ever, as far as we can see.
So let's put Sandy back in the hot seat since she likes it there.
I mean, do we have a story now?
Yeah, I think we certainly have the makings of a story here. I think that we could certainly say that the mayor has claimed for the tax. By the way, I would check this with my lawyer before we did anything, but yeah, I think we've got the city planner of the city of Las Vegas saying that, well, first of all, she doesn't recall. Maybe that should send off some alarm bells, but I think that certainly gives us a good indication that he was not either present or memorable or at the meetings for very long, that people would remember him. I think we definitely need, I would require a second source on that, just to be sure that she's not mistaken. But I would think we've got a story that says the mayor charged us for this trip, and people say he wasn't even at the meetings. But we need more than one source on that. What do you say?
I don't think you need more than one source. I do think, rather than, because sometimes you're going to get suckered. Every once in a while you're going to get suckered by someone. You've got a brown envelope at the beginning. I think you've got to be cautious. I just want somebody to make live contact with the telephone number where you start that message.
Call back and confirm.
Yeah. So in other words, you initiate, phone back and say, hi, Fran Parks, does she work there? And then can I speak with her and see if it's the same voice even, just to begin with. That's all I would suggest on that.
Don't get snookered.
Yeah. Well, you wouldn't believe that, there are
what if she's wrong and he was at the meeting just for a little while? I mean, don't you think it would be wise just to check with someone else?
Yeah, no harm. No harm, no foul. I would certainly not counsel against it. No, go. The other thing is, I don't want to speak for all media lawyers, but I can tell you this one pays a whole lot of attention to what editors and news journalists think is how to investigate. I mean, we're not in charge of how to investigate a story. You guys are. We might have been around a little bit, but you guys are the ones that choose and make decisions about what's newsworthy and how to go about pulling out fact. That's what we.
And let's throw it back out to you guys. How many of you, based on what you've got now, just by a show of hands, how many of you would go with the story now?
I would go some of it, yeah.
Okay. Anybody want to throw out anything else about this, what they're due now? Or?
And those who wouldn't, why? Or what are you waiting for?
Well, are we assuming that we've established now that this person is who we think it is?
We've done everything that
Okay, so
Dave
we
just
know
said.
this person's
Yes.
legit. Okay, well then I'll put my hand up.
Anyone else who was holding back? Who wants to talk? We've got one up here. Sage journalist Scott McRae.
It'd be an interesting thing if the memo says Aaron Hotel, Las Vegas, meetings with city planners. Well, what if the mayor was meeting with city planners from a nearby municipality?
Right.
And he happened to had to fly into Las Vegas, and he probably had to put himself up there.
I thought they were Prince George city planners right off.
Yeah. So I mean, I just wonder if.
Well, I'm thinking we've done our due diligence on that, right? I mean, we have checked with who we met with in Vegas.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah, we've talked to the mayor. We found out who we met with. We've got names.
Well,
right?
Well, we're about to turn to talking to the mayor,
Yeah.
and I want you to spend some time on that.
Okay.
We're not quite, we're going to be there
It'd be
momentarily.
great if they knew I was going to come up.
Yeah, just to be clear, some of you were already suggesting talking to the mayor, but earlier, but for the purposes of this scenario, let's say we haven't yet.
Yeah, neither Sandy nor I know what's coming.
So, yeah, well, no, they're getting surprised like you are.
We don't.
I mean, one of the things that David is going to talk about in a few minutes is going to be what's called the responsibility factors, and explain what that's all about. One of, just to sort of foreshadow and give a spoiler on one little bit of it, one of those things is getting the other side of the story, and you guys have been well ahead on that in talking about this. But what I want to now is I want to kind of turn to Sandy for a minute and say, okay, whether you have tried earlier or whether you're deciding now you have to, you're trying to get a hold of the mayor, and I want to ask about what you do to try to get a hold of him, what kinds of differing efforts you make, and maybe most importantly, if you get this guy on the phone, what are you going to say? How are you going to treat this interview? This is you're now got the makings of a pretty big story, and he's at the center of it. So what do you do, Sandy?
Well, first of all, I think you have to call him, you have to email him, you have to contact him at every number and email source you have for him. If he doesn't answer, I would go by his house. I really would. I wouldn't consider the house sacred. I would let him know that we had some pretty serious questions to ask him, and the longer he doesn't ask them, or the longer he doesn't return our calls, the worse it's going to look, and that we need to talk to him, and we're not going away until he does talk. So
now let's say that worked and you got him. How are you going to handle your interview?
Well, I would leave that up to Rafalina Sirianni. No, well, besides that, I think we've got to be upfront with him and say, look, we've had some allegations on it. We don't tell him everything we have yet or who we've called, but we have to say we've got some really serious allegations about the charges for this Las Vegas trip. What can you tell us about this trip, first of all? You'd kind of ease into it. I don't think you'd hit him with what you have.
So start sort of broad to see if you can maybe get him to hang himself.
Let him kind of talk about it. Let him give you some answers, and then you can sort of zero in more on what you do have and start getting more specific with them.
Get your sweaty mayor, like Derek said earlier. Okay.
Here's a question I want to put out. You're trying to get a hold of the mayor. You're driving by his house. And there's always a worry. You think you've given the guy a day, and it turns out he was tied up all day in some other thing.
Yeah.
Right? So how do you?
Well, if you don't get him, I don't think you would go with the story until you got him. Because what if he's in the hospital? What if he's out of the country and can't return your call? There's some scenarios where he might not be able to return your call. You've really got, again, to verify where he is and why he's not returning your call.
Okay, so here's the next question. You get to a point where, through all the efforts you've made, by the way, these days you have to kind of document that stuff, because that becomes evidence in terms of, but you get to a point where you know definitively he has your request. You've talked to his executive assistant.
She's passed along your message.
Who tells you she personally handed the message, he looked at the message, he knows you're waiting for the call, and it's about his Las Vegas trip. The question is, and he's not calling back. And so here's a question I want to throw out. How long do you give him? How long is, responsible or is good journalism? From that moment on. Is it 6 hours? Is it 24 hours? Is it 48 hours?
And let's say you also have a hole in your 6 o'clock news, or we've got a comment over here.
What happens is that
sorry, if I could just get you to hold on for the.
You get worried that other people might get the story before you do.
Yes.
So you start to get itchy. That's what I find happens is you're like, well, if the radio finds out about it, they're on the next hour. I still got to wait till 5. So you just get a little itchy, and that's where I find the danger can come in.
So how long would you wait?
I'd give them 24 hours probably. Yeah. But I'd be worried. I'd be sweating.
And you could also get a hold of the wife or whatever and say, look, we know that Peter's around, the ex-wife, and say we know he's around. Pass on the message. You can do that with either somebody that you really know knows where he is and give him that 24-hour deadline and then run with it.
So interesting. Show of hands. Like who would wait longer than 24 hours?
Who would wait less than 24 hours?
Radio.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing I think is it does depend a little bit on the story itself, though. I think you're answering for this particular story.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're right on the edge of an election, or you're right on the cusp of a council meeting, or there's something that makes it imminent and important. I mean, I think it really does strike me as, you're talking about this story when you say 24 hours, I think. There's some story, who here would have a situation where you'd say unavailable for comment if you were a print reporter, if they didn't return your call within 20 minutes and you were right at press line, would you say?
No.
Would not receive?
Not in 20 minutes.
Okay, what's the minimum amount of time that you would go?
21.
21.
Well, I mean, but I think Dave's point is a very good one, because if, for example, it's the police have just told you they're about to charge somebody with a crime. You've just phoned them to get their reaction, but their reaction isn't going to change that they've been charged with a crime. I presume at that point you don't need their reaction. It's not like you're trying to give them a chance to tell you
if they're
that
smart,
it's false,
they won't say anything anyway.
Yeah.
If they're smart, they won't say anything anyway.
So he's quite right. It does depend on the story a little bit. But a piece I wanted to kind of get in here, and I'm going to ask. We're kind of right on the edge now of a story, of actually publishing a story. So what I wanted, before we do though, I want to do a gut check, and I want to have David spend a bit of time talking about the handout that's coming around, and that is the responsibility factors, because I think this is the point where you need to think, okay, is a judge gonna, who might have not quite think the competition sniffing around is as big a deal as you do, for example, is a judge going to be looking at this as being responsibly handled, or handled with unseemly haste, or what? And so let David just kind of take you through how, and this is, by the way, not called it's not a truth defense. It's a defense that it turns out you got something a bit wrong, you can be saved. So it's very important backup to have, as long as you can show you were responsible.
This is a whole new species of privilege that was invented largely in England, but also Australia 20 years ago, and has been imported into Canada very recently. And it's a checklist. In England, they have a checklist that's quite different than ours. It says one of the items on the checklist is that it depends on the tone of which is, I guess, a direct attack on tabloids. So this is our Canadian checklist for responsible journalism. And what the courts say about themselves is that this is not a series of hurdles you have to make it over. These are just things that might be relevant. But in fact, the judges, I took the first responsible journalism defense in British Columbia, first in Canada, and I can tell you that the judges do treat it as a series of hurdles, that you have to make it over each one of these hurdles when they come to actually apply the responsible journalism criteria. I'm going to give you comments on each of them. You can see the first thing is you're not anywhere if it's not, quote, public interest. Well, I'm going to say that public interest and public interest are separate things, and it comes up twice in this list. And the broader public interest, the top one, just about anything you're interested in or that would make its way into the news in the ordinary sense, that is newsworthy, is going to be found to be an element of public interest, pretty much. It's very broad. It would have to be awfully puerile little tittle-tattle. It would have to be really insignificant attack on character.
How about mayor goes to a lap dance bar?
Would be newsworthy, in my opinion. Okay. So then the next, would be public interest. Now, the seriousness of the allegation, well, of course you're thinking about the seriousness of the allegation. It doesn't help you much. Of course you're worried because you're not going to be into defamation unless you've damaged someone's reputation. That's going to be one of the things you think about. The next is the public importance of the matter. That's very important criteria. So you've got to have something that matters before you're going to get this defense. The urgency of the matter. Now, I got to tell you, when you're trying to defend a journalist for having jumped over all these hurdles, which aren't hurdles, they're always going to say, well, you could have waited, you could have phoned another time, you could have interviewed another person, coulda, shoulda, coulda, woulda answered, coulda put in more stories. It's always going to be coulda, woulda, shoulda, woulda. It's what you're going to get, no matter what. So what I'm going to say is, you want to think about why you've got to print today, not just that someone's going to beat you to the punch, but why in the public interest it's urgent. And that's going to be a criteria of some interest. Okay. Status and reliability of the sources. Now, I'm going to say this, that is critical to my way of thinking. Every journalist has to have a very big nose. That's why I'm in this field, is the size of, you've got to be able to smell a rat.
Can we just pause there for a second, David, and just get Sandy to jump in on what sort of litmus test you use for reliability of a source?
Well, we gotta, you've got to know who they are, where they work. It would be nice if you knew what their motives are, but none of us are mind readers. I mean, a lot of it is just sort of asking questions and getting to know these people if you can. Often you're talking to people you've never met before, like this woman on the phone. So yeah, you do. You have to make sure she is who she says she is. But a lot of it is just meeting them in person and verifying they are who they say they are.
Or double sourcing, like you mentioned earlier. Yeah. And David, if you want to pick up.
Yeah, I was going to go back now to the item number 6 is what the court in this province, on appeal from the first attempted defense, said, well, that really is the key element, that you have to have gone to the person you're talking about and given them a full opportunity to respond to all of the imputations you're expressing against them. That's not just, that's all of the things you say he did wrong. It's not necessarily all of the evidence you have initially, but it is best if it's everything, that you give them a full opportunity. Now, what we tell journalists to do is to keep a record of every attempt that you make to obtain the side of the quarry's side of the story, as we say, the quarry's side of the story.
You mean phone calls, dates,
phone calls,
everything?
dates, times. Tape recording is wonderful, please. It used to be that when you had a meeting with media lawyers that Dan and I have participated with for 20 or 30 years, is that half of them said journalists should get rid of their notes as soon as they're finished the story. The other half of the media lawyers said you've got to keep your notes forever. Everybody says the latter now. We have to be keeping records forever. And the best you can get. Tape is fabulous. Whether or not you tell them you're taping it, from a print point of view, I'm going to say, if you're taping them, you are entitled, if you are entitled not to tell them that you're taping. And there are some, there's some concerns about that. There's some leanings different ways on privacy and so on but it's a very good way to make sure that you've got the thing. You can tell them that you're taping. Go ahead. Tell them that.
Big premium, though. If you're keep all your tapes, keep all your notes.
Keep all your notes.
Big premium on them being professional.
Yeah, on doing a really clear, keep a record of every single thing that happens in terms of your attempt to get hold of them, because you're going to have to prove it. You're going to have to prove you gave them the full opportunity to respond in order to have this defense. This, number 6, is the key thing. So the key things, the way I would look at it is, how serious is this? Well, we better be as careful as the seriousness requires. We better think about the coulda, shoulda, woulda. So we're really thinking hard about whether we've got to beat the competing news stories and stuff. You've got to make sure you gave a complete opportunity to the other side. Now then, number 7 is a very important point, but it's a general point about anything that defames anybody. Sometimes you go along in a story and there's something that's quite damaging that sticks out like a sore thumb. It hasn't got anything to do with the hook of the story or its public interest. It's just you go way over here to the side to say this mean thing about a person. Well, every editor in this room knows what that is. That, sits out like a sore thumb. It's some sort of sideways attack at a person. It's got nothing to do with the thrust of the story, with the hook that brings the reader in, that gets the eyeballs there, that's the headline. If you go out of your way what you've got to do is kill your babies, is the way we say it. You've got to get rid, you like that smart remark about that person so much that you put it in there. Well, you've got to kill your babies and keep the story, the thread of the story. If something you say is damaging to someone and has nothing to do with the hook, then you're in the wrong business. Don't think so?
What about urgency, David? I mean, what, just kind of, you sort of stood in front of a judge and talked about urgency.
Mm-hmm. We've had some help.
I haven't had that particular, and my inclination is to think that what journalists consider urgent, judges consider completely non-urgent, and why do you rush the story?
It's partly then, you and I, it's our problem of presentation of the situation, and it's also that the judge doesn't give a damn about whether the Kamloops this week beats the Kamloops Daily News or whatever. They don't care.
Would a judge think of this story as having urgency?
I would think he might not. I mean, if what happens, and this is, you can imagine it working with a jury. You've got to imagine that, some of the jury's been damaged in some respects by something some newspaper said about them or somebody said about them on TV or something at some point, and they're kind of resentful of the power of the media. They're a little bit frightened of it. They're sympathetic to a plaintiff who's sitting there with tears streaming down, saying, if they just phone me. And I mean, I was only away for 10 days. I only avoided them for 10 days. It's just, I can tell you. You sort of can't believe, well, the world will stop. News is a perishable commodity. You make the arguments that the Supreme Court of Canada allows us to make and encourages us to make, and the jury's completely eating out of the hand. So what I have to say is, what I want you guys to do is to make such a diligently, such a significant record of constant attempt to get, where you're, he's still not there because you're sitting in his driveway, but you phone him a third time, you phone him a fourth time, you write the notes. You keep notes, and to have those, to document it so that you're the victim of this person avoiding you, rather than the other way around.
So, hate to interrupt, but what would you consider from the legal side, what's a reasonable length of time to wait? Because if you say, we churn and burn every day, but is 24 hours enough? Is 2 weeks enough? If you take out the competition factor with the other media, you could say 3 months. You need to give the guy what's reasonable from a legal standpoint?
Well, okay, we've had very little guidance from the courts about that, so that all that I really have is the limited experience. We've had this defense for how long? I don't know. But anyway, we've all been pleading it for 20 years, but since Reynolds came down. But we haven't got a lot of experience with how the courts handle this. There are some good judicial comments indicating that they appreciate that news is a perishable commodity. They appreciate that there's competition. They understand that they understand your situation to some extent. You get those comments from, typically they're then, but it's then you get this lovely word, however. And then you get the other side, this poor citizen entitled to have their reputation, and it's the only thing they have in their entire life. It's the only thing. I'm not kidding. I'm just going to say, it's a problem, because what we have here is how long is the registrar's nose? Well, how long is his arm? It's exactly that kind of problem.
I'll throw in this little perspective, which is, I think a lot of it depends on, from the point the person knows you're on the story and the point the person knows you're waiting for their response, there's a point of time, and maybe it's 24 hours, maybe it's 48 hours, where it's obvious they're not answering. They're hunkering down and hoping you don't do it. And so at that point, I think a jury or judge might conclude that. There's a question here, and then we're going to move to the next slide.
David, just in regards to point 7 about defamatory statements, what if you're covering the story and talking to someone who says that guy is nothing but a whatever, he says something defaming whoever it is we're doing the story about? Who's responsible? Can you use that? Do you have to prove that what he's saying is actually truthful? You know, like it's a juicy stuff, like this guy sells drugs on the side, or I don't know, I'm just throwing these things out.
Right. Okay, well, those are two separate things, but it can be that you've raised. One, I thought, was an expression of opinion. This guy's a dirty, rotty, lousy bastard. And if there's a expression of an opinion honestly held by the speaker, not honestly held by you, that's based on fact that the reader or the viewer can tell is the foundation for the expression of opinion, and the person honestly holds it, you're home free with fair comment. On the second part, he deals drugs on the side. It's a fact. It's about, that's a fact. And the only way to defend fact is either to fall under privilege or to prove it's true. And where it's a crime, if it's the implication is it's illicit drugs, you may have there's only one standard of proof now civilly. Sorry, that the law's changed on that. It used to be that you had to meet a special super standard somewhere between beyond a reasonable doubt and balance of probabilities. But the super standard's gone. It's just balance of probabilities now. But I can tell you, as the imputation gets more and more serious, the court is going to require, it's just instinct, the court's going to require more and more cogent proof of the facts, more and more coherent and pointed proof of the fact, generally speaking.
We're going to have to move to make sure we get to the actual story here because I want to make sure we have time.
Deadline. We're on deadline.
So for better or for worse, here's text messages come in from Sandy to Barb. Barb, the mayor's story, he's had almost 24 hours, hasn't called. I hear CBC sniffing around. Go with it now, page 1. So, okay, for better or for worse, we're into the muck now. And here's the front page the next morning. Mayor, and I'm going to get Sandy to comment first of all, so I'm going to give it a warning as I read it, on whether you would have approved this front page. Mayor fudges expenses. Mayor Hawthorne submitted expenses for a Las Vegas meeting with a city planner who denies any such meeting took place. The expenses, nearly $2,000, were reimbursed in 2011, but Vegas planner Fran Parks told the Daily News no such meeting took place. The mayor's brother Bob confirmed that he and the mayor were on a Vegas holiday, but claims his brother didn't do anything dishonest. The mayor has not responded to the Daily News request. What do you think, Sandy?
Well, I don't really have any problem with that, I'll be honest. I'm probably missing something at first blush here, but it looks okay to me. I mean, I don't really have a lot of issues with it. I think she stuck to the facts. She's not putting her own opinions in there. I don't know, maybe the title is a little more inflammatory than the story.
You're getting a reaction to the headline, yeah?
Yeah.
No problem.
I'm not seeing a lot of issues there.
Well, let's see the rest of the story, and then let's get some. This is it goes on to A2 here a little bit.
Some of you guys at the back corner from Black Press, would you have a problem with that headline? You would?
Here, I'll go back to it. Mayor fudges expenses. Pretty hard hitting. Sell a lot of newspapers.
In our case, we basically said he's guilty without any proof of it. I mean, Mayor fudges expenses, we're saying he's done it. And we haven't had a chance to talk to him about it. That's why I don't think we'd do that.
So I mean, so at the point where, even though he seems to be avoiding you, you haven't talked to him. Maybe something that's more, neutral.
Mayor's expense.
Burning questions about mayor's trip to Vegas or something like that. Yeah.
What happens if Vegas didn't stay in Vegas?
Yeah, that's a good one. Here's page 8. Here's A2. They call it Vegas Gate. Where's it? Councilors call for investigation. The mayor's trip was covered by taxpayers, but he was at a strip club and playing poker, according to his credit card statement. Taxpayers Association President Dale Reed has called for his resignation. Read more at thedailynews.com.
Dan, I see. Is that the credit card there? Or?
Yeah, and
they
publish part of the guy's credit card invoice.
I like showing what he was really up to in Vegas.
On the sidebar, yeah. What he was really up to.
great.
Comments on that one? Dart?
It's fun.
Without having the mayor to answer any of those, I mean, there's too many questions in the first page for sure. We don't know for sure it was that city planner he was going to meet. David said, you know, when I first read it, I thought he was down there with the Prince George planners. So it could have been any other planner. His brother said, yeah, we were on a holiday in Vegas, but he didn't, as far as I can tell, he didn't say what date. So they may have gone on another holiday in Vegas. I mean, there's too many things that without, you know, pinning the mayor to say, you know, get him to respond to these, there's too many things for me to be the least bit comfortable with everything.
It's a bit pretty conclusionary.
Yeah, I have problems with the second page the most, like publishing. Can you publish somebody? I mean,
well, there's a
know?
privacy issue right there.
Yeah.
I like the fact too they've already got responses and reaction from other people. Like Taxpayers Association President Dale Reed has called for his resignation. Like they're already asking reaction.
They're already getting
from
react.
sources,
Yeah.
looking for reaction when they haven't actually spoke to the mayor yet.
Well, if you don't like,
all these other people saying
mean,
get rid of them, and yet they haven't even spoken to the mayor.
Yeah.
Right. Well, way to get it really started and cranked
And
up.
if they have more information, why are they telling you to go to the Daily News website instead of telling it in this paper to keep everything in context? I have
that's
some real
multi-platform
problems
news, Sandy.
Well, I just have a problem with that. I think you lay out everything you have in a story like that. You don't ask people to go and find out at some other site.
We still don't know that this is the same Richard Hawthorne. It's a different credit card. It's not a Visa, it's a MasterCard. So, I mean, yes, it matches date-wise somewhat, but you still don't know it's him.
Okay, so we got some problems. Well, if you got problems now, then wait till you read the website. DailyNews.com. Top story: Mayor caught cheating on expenses.
Oh, yeah, there it is. That's great.
Mayor's hot water over a taxpayer-funded trip to Las Vegas. He claimed was for meetings. The Daily News has learned that he spent time at a strip club and entered a poker tournament. Watch video of the strip club where the mayor spent $390. And we had a bit of a technical issue there, but otherwise you'd be watching right now a YouTube video of the hottest strip club in Vegas.
Oh,
Listen, Vegas planner confirms
Can't
there's
we
no
fix
such
that?
meeting.
And then the comments.
Grumpy.
What a scumbag.
Grumpy 999. By the way, do you allow anonymous comments on your website? I don't know. Grumpy 999 says, "What a scumbag! Lap dances and poker on the taxpayer's dime." We have to run this joker out of town.
So why don't we just
something in the water?
let's bring Dan in here on some legal advice because he's been making David do all that. So so Dan, can you post that YouTube video like that? Can you do that?
Well, there's two questions there really. One is a copyright question, and the other one is sort of more of the news implication or question. So on the first of those, there's a couple of things to know. One is, there's a lot of grab it off the internet reporting going on these days, especially in when you're trying to especially television when you're trying to give visuals and give everything else. So what you need to know is just because something's on YouTube doesn't mean that it's free for the grabbing. And in fact, the presumption is that everything up there, regardless of whether it's been posted on Flickr or YouTube or Facebook or anywhere else, if it's a photograph, it's a video, if it's somebody's composition, it is copyrighted. Now, in the news business, you have a nice gift, which is called the defense of fair use, which is when something is genuinely connected to and germane to a news story, you can use a fair amount of it if you give credit. If you give credit. So that's one thing that...
And there's two credits.
Credit to the source, and if you know it, credit to the owner. So author, owner. So the that's something to be aware of. Now in this case, leaving aside for a moment the question of news value and what imputation it might have, all they've done is include a hyperlink, which is actually saves them on the copyright front. We've had rulings from the Supreme Court of Canada that a mere link to something is not publishing the thing. So if they had an embedded video screen right on their own website, that would be in a different legal category of breach than just having a link. From the standpoint of an imputation, you click on this link and what you're going to see is a bunch of TNA jiggling around and music and so the implication is, well, you know, is that really what the mayor was doing? Is that actually part of the story? Does that fall into item number, whatever it is on the list, of being something that is sort of gratuitous dirt thrown in? You don't know. I mean, and so that's a concern as far as what it implies.
So if you have that YouTube video and you're a broadcast outlet and you want to use just a little piece of it in your story, if you say, you know, the source is YouTube, can you? Is that the fair use?
As a matter of fact, yeah. If you've got something that is genuinely connected to news story, and you're going to use a reasonable amount of it, and there's no magic number to that, it might depend on the content, how relevant it is to the story. You can use it. Of course, you don't know whether somebody cares about their copyright or not. This one happens to be a commercial ad by the company, so I bet they do. But you would have to credit the source, and in some cases, the only source you know is YouTube, because the person who posted is listed as you know, Jokerman 97, and you can't find out who that is. So all you can say is source YouTube, and but if there is an owner, and you can look on the properties of the thing, and you can get a hold of somebody, you can try to find out who it is. So, and if you know who owns it, in this case, if you watch the video, you'd find out that it was a video owned and put out by Sapphire Gentlemen's Club. You'd have to say source YouTube, Sapphire Gentlemen's Club.
I don't want to be difficult, but I'm going to say that there is a distinction in the section you're referring to between owner and author, because if you are a full-time employee and you're a photographer or a cameraman, the company that employs you owns the copyright in your product. If you are a freelancer, you own your own the copyright in your own material, and you're probably licensing it for one-time use as a commercial enterprise. You are, in either case, the author. So if the source is CFJC TV, the source is CFJC TV, and the author is Sandy, then you've got to, and both appear in the original, then you've got to put both up, even though Sandy may not be the owner, she's the author. So the word isn't owner, it's author.
So you might want to check that one with David or Dan then. But we have another question over here.
Sorry.
I'm just curious, with what you guys do for a living, how often do you watch TV, read the paper, listen to the radio, and hear things that you're thinking, that person could get sued for what just went to air? Like, how often do you see that? Or put another way, how many, do you think that journalists are using their lawyers enough to check over things?
Careful, don't ask a lawyer that.
Yeah. That's like a T-ball. You should be calling your lawyer 10 times as many. I see things very, I mean, I'm sort of prey conscious for that kind of stuff, right? I mean, obviously I watch, but I see, I don't see huge things. I mean, you look at things and think, okay, I can tell that was well lawyered, or that was obviously lawyered, and other things you can tell that they're cranking away, and particularly on things like immediate reaction to an arrest, just to give one example, and you get a family just absolutely lambasting some guy, which gets into contempt issues and stuff too. I mean, you sit that kind of stuff, because it's happening all so quickly. So yeah, I see it quite often. I mean, I think what happens is the more journalists know, the journalists who call me the most are the most knowledgeable, experienced journalists in the province. And it's because they spot all the problems.
Actually, all the most knowledgeable in the province call me.
Yeah. Well, just teasing. I meant like in that league, anyways. So, if you're not spotting problems, you might need to look like part of this exercise is to just get these antennae up, right? We're not solving necessarily all these issues, but we're trying to flag them.
Right.
Actually, I was going to say, I think the journalists are doing a wonderful job, and so it is not all that frequently that suddenly you see a headline, usually in a major daily or on a front-ranking broadcast news, and you see, that's contempt. You think, gosh, there's going to be a change of venue application or something like that. So every once in a while we see something where somebody just must have missed it. But that 90% of it, I think the journalists are doing extremely well. It's my own view, and in fact, to the point where we haven't got as many cases as we used to have.
And that's a tragedy. And going back to was it Raphael or Raphaela? Going back to Raf's point there about the reader comments that she pointed out there, is there an issue with that, Dan? Is there a problem with having that kind of thing there? I mean, he calls him a scumbag. Is there any issue of defamation or any problems with allowing that kind of posting? Do you have to be monitoring that and taking that down? What do you do?
From my point of view, the issue of liability for reader comments is one that's a big question mark, because some people say, well, no, that's just reader comments, that's not our stuff. Other people say, well, no, it's just like a letter to the editor. I mean, of course you're publishing that stuff. And then people say, well, yeah, but there's hundreds and hundreds of them every day. We couldn't possibly vet them all, so we just have report abuse, right? So after the fact. The law is a bit uncertain on it. It basically is, you could have something David alluded to earlier called an innocent dissemination defense, as long as you don't know about it and you're not negligent. But I think most judges, unless you had thousands or at least many hundreds of postings a day, would say you were negligent if you weren't reading like the one comment you got that day, which is, you know, this one here. And so when you do read those comments, you have somebody assigned to that, whether it's counsel or somebody internally who then spots things. The things that I tell people to look for is mostly negative allegations of fact. Yep. People can actually go pretty far, thanks to the Rafe Mayer Supreme Court Canada case, pretty far in saying outrageous things that are clear opinion. Actually, what a scumbag would be completely fine.
Yep. It would be fine. It's an epithet. It's
just to say lap dances and poker on the taxpayer's dime implies that the taxpayer was actually paying for the Sapphire Gentlemen's Club and paying for his entry fee in the poker. I think that's a statement of fact that would be a problem. So that's a really important distinction. People can get away with lots of stuff, but when somebody says, you know, you did a story about the fire chief in Oliver, and now they've said, oh yeah, he worked with that guy and he was always a drinker, or something that's factual, look out and keep that stuff.
I'm just going to say one or two other things. First of all, quickly, the United States has Section 230 of the Computer Decency Act, which protects the host permanently from any liability for things posted by others. Okay, so that was part of Clinton's deal when the computer industry stopped putting women under 18 or sexual objects under 18 on the internet. England has just done the same thing. They've got a draft new Defamation Act, which is largely buried in the regulations, the guts of which, but will provide protection for the host of an internet space a website where there's public comment. We don't have any protection. We're sitting here. And so when Dan says it's dangerous, it's dangerous. Now then the question is, the Globe and Mail, basically, how much time do you have? How quickly do you have to monitor? How quickly, if you've got to report abuse, how quickly do you have to get there and take it down? Do you automatically take it down as soon as there's a complaint? Does it automatically come down as soon as there's a complaint, or do you have to say, well, we'll look at the complaint within 24 hours or within 1 hour? What's your time frame? It gets to be...
Well, David, unfortunately, we're in the middle of debating that, and this comes in. I have to move this along.
Man's apology.
Holy crap. Rick Hawthorne is calling for a public apology from the Daily News over an irresponsible story, falsely accused the mayor of deceiving taxpayers about expense. If they had talked to me instead of rushing to print, they would have learned that it was just a staff error. It was originally going to be a trip to Vegas on city business, but I chose to take a holiday instead. The correction was all documented. I'm talking to my lawyer about suing. And by the way, if that wasn't a bad enough day, your FOI request comes back. Accounting memo, City of Prince George. Mayor Hawthorne, please reverse expense claim for a Las Vegas trip, meeting not proceeding. Mayor traveling for personal holiday instead.
So let's get Sandy back in the hot seat.
Well, actually,
you mean we didn't have this stuff before we went to print?
This leads to Sandy's email to David. David, we may have blown it on the mayor. Should we be apologizing?
Well, one of the things that I want to say is you should never be worried about apology. I think it always makes the newspaper look good. I really do believe it.
So you just publish your apology? Is that simple?
What would you do, Sandy, before David got back to you? What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, something, we need to apologize. If we've gone to print without, we've made the FOI request and we haven't waited for it, yeah, that's not good.
So do you think, do you go to apologize right away, or do you maybe do some checking or something first? What would you do?
I would apologize right away, but I would also, I mean, make sure too that you can at the same time check and make sure that all of this is correct. But I don't think it hurts to apologize either.
Let's just get a show of hands quickly. Just how many people would go with an apology right away? And how? And those of you who wouldn't, are you just raise your hand if you think that you would apologize, or if you're going to do more digging. So more digging or apologize? More digging.
So what would you dig?
Well, I would want to know why he didn't. I would want to know why he didn't respond sooner. And I mean, if there was a legitimate reason why, but if he just said, I just didn't feel like calling you back, or he had some lame excuse as to why he wasn't calling back, that would set my alarm bells off the other way. If he was in hospital like Sandy had suggested, or there was something, but when you've tried all over the place to get a hold of the guy, and you've given him a deadline, you've given him a timeline, and you said, you know, we're going with this story, we want your comments, this is when we need to hear from you by, or we're running it, and he's got other venues, he could have his brother Bob phone you if he's laid up in hospital or something, then I would want to know what was going on there.
Is there anybody you can contact?
Well,
yeah.
Cindy.
Yeah. So we had lots
Cindy
of
Hall at City Hall?
Yeah, City Hall, City Hall.
Cindy Hall, yeah.
I still think you apologize for suggesting he fudged his, expenses, but I mean, you still may have a story in what he was doing in the strip club.
Well, let's see.
I mean, there may be some stories still to tell, but.
Oh, but wait a minute, but a memo just came from Barb though, look.
What?
Oh, maybe we're okay.
You keep sandbagging. We're okay. The police just confirmed they're investigating. Oh. Still. Would you stop?
We're okay, thank goodness. The police just confirmed they're investigating the mayor. The city staffer came forward and told him he made her backdate the correction note after he got wind of the Vegas story we were doing. They may charge him with fraud and breach of trust. Can we report that? Okay, well, let's get to report that part. There's a new verb in the lexicon. This is called doing an Adrian Dix, by the way. This is called doing a premiere, next premiere. Anyways, the
boyish youth, during his boyish youth, yeah.
Okay, well, there's a big curve in the road here, and well, I guess one of the questions is, okay, suddenly the police are investigating him for fraud and breach of trust. David, can they report that?
No, I have a general rule, which is rumor of criminal charge, never a story. And the key example, rumor of criminal charge is never a story, is my general rule. And the proof of this rule is Brian Mulroney. The Brian Mulroney adventure. Maybe some of you are old enough to remember that, but what happened there? So it's never a story. Wait for it. Wait for it, you will have an opportunity. Unless there is a police press conference, in which case you do have a privilege for police press conferences if Canada continues to follow McCartan in England and De Silva in Ontario.
What if, short of a police conference, you call an officer and on the record they confirm they are investigating the mayor?
That's okay. That's not rumor of criminal charge. Investigating. I don't like investigating. No. You know, we gotta wait for it. It's coming. You know, patience.
Everybody else is running it, David.
I know.
Get on the bus.
That never makes any difference to me. That never makes any difference to me, whether others are running it or not. Sometimes we might authorize a follow-up story when the lead is that the errant journalists went off the deep end and reported something. That can sometimes be the beginning of a story. But, yeah.
Okay, well,
what about you?
You've now waited for it, and check it out.
So this says Mayor Hawthorne does the honorable thing. Mayor Hawthorne has stepped aside to deal with the charge of breach of trust, which was laid yesterday. He is cooperating fully with the authorities. I'm looking forward to my name being cleared. I cannot say more as the matter is now before the courts.
Right. Okay, the thing, he is cooperating fully with the authorities is, like, it's got to be sourced to somebody.
This is his press release.
It's his press release. Okay. Well then,
I mean, they always say that like there's
that should
like
be
an
in the
alternative.
quotes. That should be in the quotes because I mean it's like if it's an opinion and what whose is it? So
Right.
that's not news. But other than that, that gets published for sure. I would think, Sandy.
Oh, yeah.
So we
If
have
it's coming
we have
from
like
his office?
nearly no time. Obviously, the charge is a story, no problem. We're not going to get into the maybe next year's will be what happens next because you know, then you're into bail hearing bans, you're into contempt of court, trying not to mess up a criminal trial and all that. And we have comment.
Question, actually. For those of us who chose to apologize immediately, could that be construed as an admission of guilt on our part?
No, there is, and this was a recent act in British Columbia, added piece of legislation called the Apology Act, which was put in by outgoing Liberal Attorney General, and it's a brilliant thing. It allows people to apologize without attracting liability. So it reversed the decision in Pollen versus Monday magazine, which had held that if you apologize, you can't raise any defense.
But you do look stupid.
You do look stupid.
Question though, can you phone, like say before you knew all this, you could phone the mayor and apologize if you've made a mistake, but say we have documentation that you never returned our calls, you had plenty of opportunity, why didn't you? I mean, is there a problem with offering up a verbal apology but not putting it in the paper yet?
Well, and that gets into a little thing that probably I have to do in 30 seconds, and that is, one, when you're going to apologize, going to the person is actually a very good idea because it makes it personal, and quite often people will sue because they never really got a direct apology. When you do write the apology, this is another topic, but you get into how do you word it, and you know you stay away from these apologies that say, you know, we never intended to say this, and if anybody read our story wrong, we're sorry. It's basically saying if the audience is so stupid, we're sorry for their stupidity.
If anyone drew the
That's a
unwarranted
non-apology.
inference.
You have to be, if you're really going to do it, it's we screwed up, or we made an error, we're writing to correct it, here's the correct facts, and we're sorry.
Okay, and just a moment, I'm going to ask Scott McCrae to give us the closing remarks here, unless there's anything anybody's burning to get out. One more? Okay, so, yeah.
In the newspaper story, the web story, and any of those cases, I'm just curious, and my colleague James might laugh at this, but does the word allegedly get you off the hook every single time?
No. Too bad. It'd really be nice.
Because I'm curious, like, can you, because does it? Like,
is it the magic?
Said allegedly, does that get you off the hook?
It would make our advice so just put alleged in front of every verb and you're good.
Yeah.
No, I think it has a very important place. David might have another perspective, but when there is in fact an official allegation against somebody, you know, Willie Pickton is allegedly Canada's worst serial killer. You know, then absolutely, that makes the story true because that's how you're describing it. If you're throwing it in just as sort of a comfort word, it generally is not helping you much. So when you're reporting that somebody is claiming, and in fact, on the responsibility factors, one of the things is when that we've now got, you can, in very limited circumstances, repeat somebody's libelous statement because if it's public interest that he just said it, that the Premier accused the Leader of the Opposition of something horrible. You know,
which is the
Premier has alleged the Leader of the Opposition said X, Y, Z. His response is he denies it. The allegations are unproven. I mean, you actually could be safe reporting it because that's a truthful, accurate, fair way of doing it.
That is the defense of reportage, which is not part of the checkpoints for this defense. It's a separate defense that Madam Justice McLaughlin laid out separately. So the fact that it's on this list, and I skipped it, it's number 8. I skipped it because it isn't part of the responsible journalism line of authorities. If you go back to the case that creates it, it's a separate defense, reportage. And we'd have to bore you to death.
And
Always leave them wanting more.
Yeah, exactly. We'll do that another night.